Ethan stood quietly at the entrance of Le Magnifique, his old shoes brushing against the velvet carpet as he took a hesitant step inside. The dazzling chandeliers above threw golden light across polished marble floors, but none of it made him feel welcome. He was just a janitor, dressed in a faded shirt and trousers that screamed of labor, not luxury. The maitre d', eyes sharp with disdain, blocked his way. A whisper of laughter spread among a nearby table where Victoria, Brandon, and Charles sipped wine. "This place isn't for people like you," the manager, Mr. Collins, said coldly. And in front of the wealthy crowd, Ethan was escorted out, humiliated under the echo of cruel chuckles. But humiliation has a strange way of planting seeds. What no one knew was that Ethan had spent years mastering investments, quietly building a fortune hidden behind his humble appearance. And while the elite sneered at him tonight, tomorrow would belong to him. Because by the next evening, Ethan would not just walk back into Le Magnifique. He would walk in as its new owner. The evening buzzed with music and clinking glasses inside Le Magnifique. A string quartet played softly in the corner, the sound of violins weaving through the extravagant dining hall where pearls, silk, and diamonds glimmered under golden chandeliers. Ethan, still reeling from the sting of the night before, stood just outside the glass doors, peering in. His janitor's uniform, wrinkled and faded, betrayed him instantly to anyone who cared to look. But Ethan wasn't here to eat tonight. He wanted only to observe, to remind himself why he was so often invisible to people like those inside. Through the glass, he could see Mr. Collins gliding between tables, his back straight as a blade, his eyes scanning for imperfection like a hawk. Beside him, a table of the city's elite filled the room with arrogant laughter. Victoria, wrapped in an emerald gown that seemed to shine brighter than the chandeliers, whispered something cruel behind her manicured hand. Brandon, the careless heir, let out a guffaw that drew half the room's attention. Charles, always hungry to prove superiority, smirked as he swirled his wine with exaggerated elegance. Ethan stepped inside quietly, just as the maitre d' noticed him. Conversations faltered. Forks paused midair. It was not his presence that commanded attention, but the audacity of his appearance in a place so fiercely guarded by wealth and vanity. "Back again?" Mr. Collins sneered, his voice dripping with venomous courtesy. "I thought we made it clear yesterday, this establishment has standards." Victoria's laugh rang out, loud enough to turn heads. "Perhaps he's here to clean the floors," she said, her words like polished daggers. Brandon snorted, and Charles added with mock pity, "Poor man must be lost. Or maybe he thinks money grows on mop handles." Heat rose to Ethan's cheeks, but he lowered his gaze, choosing silence over retaliation. His humility, misunderstood as weakness, only fed their cruelty. Murmurs swept the room, patrons whispering judgments as if humiliation were part of the night's entertainment. "Tell me," Mr. Collins continued, stepping closer, "do you think this is some kind of charity hall? That we exist to entertain people like you?" His eyes gleamed with a malicious delight at every ripple of laughter spreading through the hall. "Go on, tell us why you're here." Ethan's voice, soft and steady, barely rose above the room's laughter. "I only wanted to see beauty up close." "Is that such a crime?" The honesty in his tone made a few guests glance uncomfortably at one another. But Charles leaned forward, seizing the moment. "Beauty, my friend, costs money. And if you can't afford it, you don't belong here. Isn't that right, Mr. Collins?" The manager chuckled. "Exactly right. Now, please, before I call security." Ethan turned, his heart heavy but his dignity intact. As he walked toward the door, he heard Victoria whisper just loud enough for him to catch, "Some people should learn their place." But Ethan's mind was already elsewhere. He was thinking of the accounts, the investments, the silent empire he had been building in the shadows. He left quietly that night, yet a storm was forming beneath his calm exterior. And while they celebrated his humiliation, he was already calculating his return. The night at Le Magnifique ended as it always did, with expensive wine poured into crystal glasses, laughter echoing off marble walls, and the unshakable belief that status could never be challenged. None of them knew that their cruelty had just scripted the prologue to their downfall. Tomorrow, Ethan would no longer be the man they pushed aside. He would be the man holding the keys to the kingdom they worshipped. The next day, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Ethan returned to Le Magnifique. He wasn't there to flaunt wealth or power. Not yet. Tonight, he wanted to test the boundaries of their cruelty, to see just how far they would go when confronted with someone they deemed unworthy. The restaurant gleamed even brighter than before. Servers glided through the aisles like dancers, carrying trays of golden-crusted hors d'oeuvres. A violinist stood near the entrance, bows sliding gracefully across strings. The place exuded a kind of sacred exclusivity, guarded by velvet ropes and sharper tongues. Ethan entered wearing the same modest clothes, drawing disapproving stares like moths to flame. Mr. Collins spotted him instantly, eyes narrowing into slits. "You again," he muttered, lips curling into a smile that promised mockery. He raised his voice for the room to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, it appears our janitor has mistaken this restaurant for his workplace once more." A chorus of laughter followed. Victoria clutched her pearls dramatically, sighing, "Oh dear, I do hope he brought a mop this time. The marble could use a shine." Brandon slapped the table, roaring with amusement, while Charles raised his glass as if to toast Ethan's humiliation. "To ambition without resources," he declared, smirking. Ethan remained calm, though the sting of every word pressed against his chest. "I came here for a meal," he said quietly. The room fell into a stunned hush, then erupted with renewed laughter. "You?" Brandon gasped between chuckles. "Do you even know what a plate costs here? It's more than your monthly salary." Victoria leaned forward, her smile razor-sharp. "Tell you what. Why don't you order something? We'll even let you look at the menu. If you can pronounce a single dish correctly, I'll pay for it." The menu was slipped into Ethan's hands like a cruel dare. French phrases and culinary terms danced before him. He had studied them before, but in this moment, under the searing gaze of the elite, his voice caught in his throat. The crowd leaned in, eager for his failure. "Go on," Charles urged, smirking. "Pick something. Or are you afraid?" Ethan's lips parted, but Mr. Collins snatched the menu back before he could speak. "This is ridiculous. He couldn't afford the cheapest appetizer if he saved all year. Why humiliate him further?" His words, masked as mercy, dripped with venom. "Unless, perhaps he'd like to prove us wrong." Brandon's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Yes, let's make this interesting. If he can pay for the most expensive meal on the menu, we'll apologize publicly. If not, he leaves and never comes back." The challenge sparked excited whispers through the restaurant. Patrons leaned in, eager for the spectacle. Victoria added, "And to ensure he doesn't wriggle out, let's say it now, no discounts, no charity. Full price. Tonight." Ethan looked around, his expression unreadable. Inside, his heart pounded, but not from fear. He thought of the empire he had quietly built, the wealth hidden behind years of silence and humility. Still, he did not reveal his hand. "Not yet." "I accept," he said simply. The room roared with laughter, as though he had just delivered the punchline of a grand joke. Mr. Collins smirked, satisfied. "Very well. Tomorrow night, then. One chance to prove yourself. But when you fail, and you will fail, don't ever set foot in Le Magnifique again." The deal was struck, sealed by cruel amusement and arrogant disbelief. As Ethan walked out into the night, the laughter trailed behind him like a chain. But beneath the stars, a different kind of fire burned in his chest. They had set the stage for his triumph. And tomorrow, the curtain would rise. Before the story continues, take a moment to think about Ethan's situation. He was laughed at, humiliated, and treated as if he had no worth simply because of how he looked. Yet, he carries within him a power no one suspects. And just like Ethan is about to prove everyone wrong, you can prove the world wrong too. If you believe in stories where the underestimated rise and the arrogant fall, make sure you subscribe right now. That way, you won't miss the moment Ethan turns the tables in spectacular fashion. Click subscribe, and let's continue this journey together. The following evening, Le Magnifique shimmered brighter than ever before. Word of the humiliating wager had spread like wildfire across the city's upper echelon. For the wealthy elite, entertainment came in many forms: private concerts, high-stakes gambling, whispered scandals, but tonight, it came in the form of a janitor who had dared to challenge their world. They had come dressed in their finest attire not only to savor exquisite cuisine but to witness a man's inevitable downfall. The restaurant buzzed with anticipation. Silk gowns brushed against marble floors, diamonds flashed beneath chandeliers, and laughter flowed as freely as champagne. The quartet played louder than usual, their music a mocking overture to the spectacle about to unfold. Servers whispered among themselves, stealing glances toward the door. Even the kitchen staff leaned closer to hear the hum of gossip that pulsed through the dining hall. He won't come. He'll be too afraid. If he does, they'll destroy him. Mr. Collins, standing tall at the entrance, thrived on this atmosphere. His smile was sharp, his eyes glinting with cruel delight as he welcomed patrons with exaggerated warmth. To him, tonight was a victory already. The humiliation of the night before was just the appetizer, tonight promised the main course. He imagined the janitor stammering, fumbling for coins he did not have, and being thrown into the street under the laughter of the powerful. At the grand table in the center of the hall sat Victoria, Brandon, and Charles, the self-anointed royalty of the evening. Victoria draped herself in emerald satin, her hair coiled into perfect waves that gleamed beneath the light. Her jeweled fingers tapped impatiently against her wine glass as she whispered predictions to Brandon. He won't come, she said confidently, though her eyes betrayed an eager spark. And if he does, it will be the highlight of the year. Brandon, his golden cufflinks catching the light, laughed loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Imagine the fool trying to read the menu again. Perhaps we'll let him mop the floors afterward as payment. His tone oozed with cruel humor. Charles swirled his glass of Bordeaux, his lips curling into a superior smile. People like him exist for one reason only, to remind us why we are here and they are not. His humiliation will reaffirm the natural order. It's poetic, really. The crowd leaned into their words, feeding on the anticipation like vultures circling prey. Every clink of glass, every ripple of laughter built the tension further. And then, the doors opened. Ethan stepped into the hall. Gasps rippled through the room, followed by a wave of hushed whispers. There he was, the janitor, wearing the same modest clothes as before, a plain shirt, trousers softened by time, shoes scuffed from years of work. His hair was unkempt, his presence unassuming. Yet something was different. His posture carried a calm assurance, a steady strength that unsettled those who had expected a broken man crawling back for mercy. Mr. Collins spotted him instantly, his lips stretching into a smirk that masked his unease. Back for your final humiliation, are you? His voice cut across the hall, sharp and clear, demanding an audience. He gestured dramatically toward Ethan as though presenting a sideshow act. Shall I prepare the cheapest glass of water on the menu? That's all you can afford, after all. Laughter broke out in pockets around the room, cruel and confident. Ethan did not flinch. He simply met Collins's gaze, his voice even and unshaken. I'm here to honor our agreement. A table, please. The audacity of the request drew silence for a moment, then fresh laughter. Patrons leaned toward one another, whispering, "He's serious?" Collins raised an eyebrow, his mockery thinly veiling a flicker of doubt. "Very well," he said with deliberate sarcasm, "a table it is." He gestured toward a small, tucked-away corner near the back of the hall, a place reserved for those who did not deserve to be seen. But Ethan did not move. Instead, he walked past Collins with measured steps, his shoes echoing softly against the marble, until he reached the grand table in the very center of the hall, the one reserved for the powerful trio. He placed his hand lightly on the chair and said, "I'll sit here." The statement struck like thunder. Gasps erupted from every corner of the restaurant. Victoria nearly spilled her wine as she stared in disbelief. "You can't sit there," she exclaimed, her voice rising an octave. "That table is reserved for It's mine now, Ethan interrupted softly but firmly. His words, calm and unyielding, rang louder than any shout. Brandon burst into laughter, pounding the table with his fist. This is priceless. He thinks claiming a seat makes him an equal. The crowd joined in, feeding on the absurdity. But Ethan remained silent, his eyes steady. He reached into his pocket and placed a sleek leather folder on the table. The laughter faltered. Curiosity pricked the air. Slowly, deliberately, he opened the folder and spread out a stack of freshly signed documents across the white linen. Mr. Collins, drawn by unease, stepped forward and snatched the top page. His smirk dissolved as he scanned the text. His face drained of color. Stamped at the bottom, unmistakable, was the official seal of transfer of ownership. Ethan's name was there, clear and undeniable. As of this afternoon, Ethan said evenly, his voice carrying across the stunned silence, "Le Magnifique belongs to me." The words reverberated through the hall, louder than the violins, sharper than crystal shattering. Chairs creaked as patrons shifted in disbelief. Whispers turned to gasps, gasps into stunned silence. Collins's hands trembled as he shuffled through the documents, each one confirming what his pride refused to accept. "You're lying," Victoria spat, her voice trembling as much from fear as anger. "This is some elaborate trick." "It has to be." Ethan leaned back in the chair he had claimed, his posture relaxed, his tone steady. "No trick. While you were laughing at me, I was buying every share. Every brick, every chandelier, every bottle of wine in this place now belongs to me." The chandeliers above seemed to tremble with the weight of his declaration. The quartet had stopped playing, their bows frozen midair. The servers stood rooted, eyes wide, unsure whether to bow or run. The elite who had come for entertainment now sat in the audience of their own humiliation. Brandon's laughter sputtered into silence. Charles's glass slipped from his fingers, the wine staining the pristine white tablecloth. Victoria's face flushed crimson as she searched for words that would not come. And Ethan sat among them, the humble janitor who had been cast out the night before, now the master of the house they worshipped. The balance of power had shifted, and it had only just begun. The stunned silence of Le Magnifique hung thick in the air, heavier than the chandeliers overhead. Ethan remained seated at the grand table, exuding calm authority while the room tried to process the impossibility of the situation. The elite who had come expecting mockery now found themselves trapped in disbelief. Victoria, usually poised and calculating, pressed her hands to her lips, struggling for words. Brandon's usual bravado faltered, his laughter extinguished by the reality of the moment. Charles's glass slipped from his fingers entirely, wine staining the crisp tablecloth beneath it. Even Mr. Collins, once so commanding, shuffled uncertainly, a storm of confusion and panic crossing his features. Ethan gestured gracefully to a server. "Wine," he said simply. "The finest vintage, please." "Open it." The waiter hesitated for a fraction of a second before obeying, recognizing that tonight, his usual hierarchy of command had shifted. Every movement Ethan made carried weight, authority, and a quiet elegance that demanded attention without arrogance. Word spread through the dining room like wildfire. Patrons whispered to one another, stealing glances between their courses, and the janitor turned on her. "Is that? He actually bought it? How is this possible?" The murmurs multiplied, echoing across the marble floors and gilded walls. Ethan opened the wine, decanted it with precision, and poured into the crystal glasses with effortless skill. The room fell into a hush. The once powerful trio sat frozen, unable to reconcile the man before them with the image they had so cruelly mocked. He leaned back, taking a sip, and smiled faintly, not at their dismay, but at the elegant symmetry of truth. His voice, calm yet carrying through the hall, addressed them directly. "While you laughed at me, I quietly built a life beyond your assumptions. You measured value by appearances. I measured it by vision and action." Victoria's hands trembled as she tried to respond, but no words came. Brandon's eyes darted to Charles, who finally whispered, "We underestimated him." "Completely." At that moment, a well-known business expert who had been quietly observing from the back of the hall stepped forward. His presence drew immediate attention. Whispers carried his reputation as one who validated true talent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice carrying authority, "what you see here is not luck or trickery. This is strategic mastery. He has executed a business move that few could even comprehend." The room collectively shivered, the weight of recognition settling on every guest. Their laughter had been replaced by awe. Ethan's calm, deliberate actions, buying the restaurant, claiming the center table, commanding respect without shouting, had transformed humiliation into spectacle, and spectacle into undeniable authority. Mr. Collins, pale and trembling, attempted to regain control. This can't be happening," he stammered. Ethan simply looked at him, his gaze gentle but resolute. "It is. And it happened while you were focused on appearances instead of substance." The crowd murmured in agreement. Guests who had once sneered now nodded silently, some even applauding softly. The trio at the grand table could no longer hide their shock. Victoria's perfect posture slumped, Brandon avoided eye contact, and Charles's face reflected the dawning realization of their misjudgment. Every movement Ethan made was precise, elegant, a quiet demonstration of control. He placed the documents back into the leather folder, folded it, and set it neatly on the table. Each action reinforced the power shift, the janitor who had been invisible, now undeniably commanding the room. He addressed the expert at the back. "Thank you for your guidance. Your presence helps to clarify the magnitude of this change for everyone here." The expert nodded, turning to the assembled guests. "What you witnessed tonight is a lesson in humility and vision. Disregard appearances at your peril. This man has demonstrated what it means to act with patience, intelligence, and silent determination." The air in Le Magnifique had shifted completely. What had begun as a scene of expected humiliation had transformed into a tableau of admiration, astonishment, and vindication. The clinking of glasses, once instruments of mockery, now rang with tentative applause, a testament to Ethan's quiet, relentless mastery. The elite who had come to witness his failure now bore witness to their own limitations. Ethan, calm and composed, allowed them a moment to absorb it, for he knew that true power does not shout, it commands quietly, with unmistakable presence. The room still vibrated with tension, a mixture of disbelief and awe. Ethan sat at the grand table, a calm epicenter amid the whirl of murmurs and whispered exclamations. The restaurant that had once been a stage for his humiliation was now the canvas for his triumph. Every crystal glass, every polished marble surface reflected the quiet authority he had claimed. Victoria, Brandon, and Charles, who had once dictated the room with their arrogance, now sat frozen, their assumptions shattered. Victoria's perfect composure had crumbled, her hands fidgeted nervously with the folds of her gown. Brandon, the loud, carefree heir, stared at Ethan with wide eyes, finally recognizing the magnitude of what had occurred. Charles, always eager to demonstrate superiority, slumped back into his chair, a rare trace of humility crossing his features. Ethan looked at each of them in turn, not with vindictiveness but with measured calm. "Last night, you laughed at me," he said softly, carrying his voice across the silent hall. "You assumed my worth based on appearances, and you were wrong. Today, the truth speaks for itself." He gestured toward the documents on the table, now neatly stacked. "Every share of this restaurant, every aspect of its operation, is now mine. While you focused on mockery, I focused on strategy, patience, and action. I did not rush to prove myself, I built quietly, unnoticed, until the moment the scales tipped." A murmur ran through the crowd, many patrons nodding in astonishment. The expert at the back, who had observed the scene, spoke up. "What you have witnessed is a masterclass in foresight and precision. True power is often invisible until it is undeniable." The elite trio could only watch as the reality sank in. Victoria's color drained from her face, Brandon's jaw clenched as he swallowed back both pride and shock. Charles stared at Ethan, silently acknowledging the depth of his underestimation. Ethan rose from the chair, a gesture both graceful and commanding. "Tonight, the lesson is simple: never mistake humility for weakness. Appearance may deceive, but action and vision endure. Collins, trembling, attempted to protest. This isn't possible. I was in control. Ethan interrupted gently but firmly. Control is an illusion without understanding. And you lack the vision to see the true potential around you. The room exhaled collectively, some in admiration, some in shock. Applause began, tentative at first, then swelling as more recognized the undeniable triumph. Ethan did not revel in the attention, he allowed it, absorbing only the justice of the moment. The once powerful figures were humbled, not destroyed by words but by truth. He picked up the folder of documents and placed it in front of him with deliberate care, signaling a shift not just of ownership but of respect. He had transformed humiliation into vindication, mockery into a quiet spectacle of authority. The elite who had once ruled with arrogance now faced the reality that power is earned, and sometimes, the most unassuming person can wield it with precision and grace. And as the evening carried on, the murmur of astonishment continued, a testament to Ethan's quiet mastery. The janitor who had been laughed at the night before was now the undeniable force in the room, the silent architect of his own spectacular victory. The atmosphere in Le Magnifique had shifted completely from the night before. The restaurant, once a stage for laughter at the expense of the humble, now hummed with a quiet sense of awe and admiration. Patrons who had come expecting to witness a humiliating spectacle found themselves entranced by the power of patience, intelligence, and strategy displayed by Ethan, the man they had so easily dismissed. The chandeliers seemed to cast a different light, one that illuminated not wealth or status but subtle mastery and calculated triumph. Victoria, Brandon, and Charles sat in stunned silence, the three figures who had once ruled the room with arrogance now dwarfed by their own misjudgment. Victoria's hands trembled slightly as she pressed them to her knees, her eyes darting nervously to the documents confirming Ethan's ownership of the restaurant. Her elegant composure had crumbled completely, the polished confidence she relied upon to dominate social situations now betrayed her. Brandon, the brash heir who had laughed the loudest, stared blankly at Ethan, his usual swagger replaced with uncertainty and disbelief. Charles, the self-assured businessman, sat rigidly in his chair, recognizing for the first time the depth of his error in underestimating someone based solely on appearance. Ethan, seated at the grand table in the center of the hall, radiated calm authority. His posture was relaxed yet commanding, every subtle gesture reinforcing the truth of his triumph. He did not gloat, he allowed the room to absorb the reality naturally, letting the silence speak louder than any declaration could. When he lifted a glass of wine and sipped slowly, the room watched, captivated not by extravagance but by the dignity and poise in his measured actions. The staff, once indifferent or cautious around him, now moved with deference, offering service that acknowledged his rightful position. Waiters and chefs alike seemed to recognize a shift in the fundamental power structure of the restaurant, and their subtle gestures of respect rippled through the audience. Patrons whispered to one another, nodding in agreement, realizing that the true spectacle had never been about wealth or status, but about vision, strategy, and patience applied consistently. Mr. Collins, once the formidable manager who had held authority like a weapon, now found himself powerless. His confidence had evaporated, replaced with disbelief and the creeping sting of humiliation. Every sarcastic remark he had ever made, every attempt to assert dominance over Ethan, now seemed trivial in comparison to the quiet, unstoppable authority Ethan wielded. Even the murmurs of approval from the patrons highlighted the contrast. Those who had scorned him now witnessed firsthand the results of patience, intelligence, and foresight. Ethan's movements were deliberate yet subtle. He stood, walked slowly among the tables, checking that service flowed seamlessly. Each action was infused with an elegance that combined humility with control, proving that mastery does not need to announce itself loudly, it commands attention simply by existing. Patrons who had once been entertained by mockery now found themselves humbled, recognizing that the man they had dismissed was the one truly in command of their environment. As the evening progressed, the story of humiliation transformed into a narrative of justice and revelation. Ethan's victory was complete, not through arrogance or vengeance, but through quiet competence and a demonstration of strategic mastery. The elite, once untouchable in their arrogance, had been humbled, the audience had been educated, and the restaurant, once a temple of exclusion, now bore witness to the undeniable power of humility and vision. The lesson was clear: never underestimate the unassuming, for within the seemingly ordinary can lie extraordinary capability and enduring influence. Ethan had not only reclaimed dignity, he had reshaped the very dynamics of power within Le Magnifique, leaving a mark that would be remembered long after the echoes of laughter had faded. The evening in Le Magnifique had settled into a profound stillness, the kind that follows an upheaval of assumptions and the quiet validation of truth. Patrons who had come for spectacle now sat in awe, fully absorbing the lesson Ethan had delivered, not with words of confrontation, but with actions of meticulous precision and unassailable strategy. The restaurant, once a symbol of exclusion and arrogance, now stood as a testament to vision, patience, and humility. Victoria, Brandon, and Charles remained at their table, no longer the rulers of the room but humbled spectators of Ethan's mastery. Victoria's hands rested nervously in her lap, her earlier confidence replaced with reflective contemplation. She had underestimated the quiet strength of a man she had judged by appearance alone. Brandon's voice, so bold and brash, was absent, his eyes, once filled with mockery, now mirrored disbelief and reluctant respect. Charles, the habitual critic and dominator, leaned back, acknowledging internally the depth of his misjudgment. Ethan moved through the restaurant, checking on each table, ensuring service was impeccable. He conversed with guests with warmth and attentiveness, his demeanor a balance of humility and authority that commanded respect effortlessly. The staff, once tentative around him, now operated seamlessly, empowered by the quiet, consistent demonstration of his capability. Their gestures of respect, subtle yet significant, reinforced the new hierarchy. Ethan was not a man to be mocked, but a leader to be recognized. The justice of the evening extended beyond recognition, it permeated consequences for the arrogant. Collins, stripped of control he had taken for granted, found his authority undermined at every turn. His attempts to manage the restaurant were now met with polite but firm resistance from staff and patrons alike. Victoria, Brandon, and Charles, each humiliated by their own assumptions, confronted the reality that privilege and status offer no protection against diligence, intelligence, and foresight. Ethan returned to his modest self after the formalities of ownership were recognized. He sat quietly in his new office, stripped of grandeur but full of fulfillment. In this moment, he understood a truth that money and power alone could never convey. His value did not come from the admiration of the elite, but from his knowledge, perseverance, and integrity. Ownership of Le Magnifique was a triumph, yes, but the deeper victory lay in the affirmation of his own path. As the night wore on, the patrons departed with reverent respect, carrying the story of Ethan's ingenuity into the city's elite circles. The lesson was clear and resonant: humility is not weakness, and true capability can flourish unnoticed until it asserts itself with undeniable authority. Ethan, the janitor-turned-owner, had restored balance, achieved justice, and returned to his authentic self, proving that greatness can reside in the unassuming and that the world's sneers often hide the seeds of one's most extraordinary triumphs. Ethan's journey reminds us all that appearances can be deceiving and true talent often hides in plain sight. Humility, patience, and silent determination can overcome arrogance and prejudice, transforming even the most impossible situations into victories. Now, it's your turn. Think about a time you were underestimated or overlooked. What did you do, or could you do, to prove your strength quietly, with strategy and patience? Share your stories and reflections in the comments below. By engaging, you become part of a community that celebrates resilience, intelligence, and the triumph of the underdog. Don't miss stories like Ethan's. Click follow to stay updated and witness more tales of the underestimated rising to incredible heights. Let's continue this journey together, celebrating the quiet victories that change everything.